Today I want to cover 3 really common problems that I see a lot of producers make that really ruin their drums. So let's start off by covering the first topic, which is swing. Namely, I actually recommend that for the most part, you don't use the swing function that comes with your DAW. Let me show you the reason why. Here I have a pretty straightforward drum pattern that I have programmed. Now, as many of you know, what swing will do is shift some of these notes for you, but it's hard to know exactly what's happening since it doesn't actually show you where these notes are being shifted to. But you can definitely hear it. For example, let's say I turn up the swing dial with this drum pattern. So we can hear that the notes are being played with an off timing, but FL Studio doesn't actually show you where these notes are being moved. So what I've done is I've run a little experiment for you. First, what I'm going to do is turn the swing up to around 30% and show you what happens to the actual notes. So you can see after I turn up the swing and I brought the MIDI notes right back into FL Studio, a few of the kicks start to hit a bit late, and that's about it. And if I turn the swing up to 70%, here's what happens to all my different sounds. Again, those same few kicks have moved even more, so they hit even later, but that's about it. And this is why I don't think using swing is the most effective way to play with the timing of your rhythms if you're trying to introduce that offbeat feel. We just end up leaving so many possibilities on the table. The swing function only really creates one very particular style of that off timing with your sounds, at least in FL Studio. But there are just so many ideas that it won't help you create. For example, you'll notice that with the swing function, it pushed these kicks so they play late. But one thing that it won't do is create a timing where the notes hit early. If I took this kick right here and instead of having it play late, like swing would do, let's see what happens if I play it a little bit early. This is introducing an entirely different feel to this drum pattern, a feel that might be better for the type of beat that you're trying to make. This is the type of timing that I like to use when I want a more aggressive energy in my beat. And the problem is that if I was solely relying on swing, I would have never gotten to this idea. Same thing with which notes are getting affected. Notice that the snares don't move. Taking your claps or your snares and moving them a bit early or a bit late can be a great way of introducing a different feel into your beats as well. And yet with the way that swing works, certain notes that sit on certain grid points will never get affected no matter how much you turn the swing up. To me, swing was a very helpful tool when people just use drum machines to make beats. It was just a simple way to program an off timing with your rhythm. But with modern DAWs and the ability to move notes around a lot more easily, there's just no excuse to not take your drums and move the sounds around yourself to create the exact rhythm that you want. Because as I've just shown, swing really just creates one very particular type of rhythm, and that's it. I would advise you to explore more ideas and be a lot more manual with your note placement. It's just going to help you create your specific ideas rather than just depend on one particular style of timing that swing provides. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 has to do with loudness control. This is something that I definitely struggled with when I first started making beats. It always felt like my drums sounded really weak in my beat, no matter how much I'd turn up the volume. And the reason why is because I didn't have a full understanding of how loudness works. Let me show you what I mean. And by the way, if you guys enjoy my videos and get a lot out of them, please think about subscribing. It really does help me out, and if you get bored of watching my videos, just unsubscribe. It's really easy to do. Anyways, let's start with the snare right here. Now you can see in the decibel meter, the snare peaks at around -9 decibels. Now let's say I wanted to get this snare louder. What I would have done before is I would go into my fader and just bring up the volume, and now when I go listen to this snare, it's peaking at -3 decibels. Alright, so that's how the snare sounds when it's at -3 decibels. Now what I want to do is play the exact same snare that I made a small change to, but listen and look to see how loud this is. As you just saw on the decibel meter, it's peaking at pretty much the exact same level, and yet it just sounds much louder. I'll play them back to back for you. Again, they're pretty much peaking at the exact same level, and yet the second snare just sounds louder. And this is what you need to understand about loudness. How loud a sound is isn't the only factor in getting it to actually seem loud. What's also important is how long it's loud for. And this is the big difference between these two snares and how I got the second one to seem so much louder than the first. Take a look at both of these snares visually. They both have their peaks around the exact same level, but if I were to bring this line a bit lower, take a look and see how much of each snare is above or louder than this line. The first snare goes above this line for a pretty short amount of time, whereas the second snare stays above this level for a longer amount of time. And this is a big reason why it just seems so much louder when we hear it. How long a sound is loud for is an extremely important factor to actually get it to sound loud in your beat. And how I achieve this effect is through using compression. This is probably something that you're sick of hearing. This is something that would instantly turn my brain off when I first started making beats because compression just confused me. So to make it easy, if you want to be able to do this very simply, I would recommend downloading Camel Crusher. It's a free plugin. And this is the exact tool that I use to get the second snare to just seem so loud. It has a single knob compressor. All you gotta do is just crank this up and it'll take care of the rest for you. Having said that, if you do actually feel like you want a deep understanding of compression, check out the video that I made that's showing up on the screen right now. Lots of people told me that after they watched that video, they finally understood compression, even after watching tons of other videos, just being confused afterwards still. Now, if you still don't understand the difference between using a compressor and just turning up the volume, let me explain this a different way. Let's say I'm home alone on a Friday night and I feel like getting to some of that monkey business, if you know what I mean. So I boot up Tinder, but I see I've got 0 matches. It's no wonder I look hideous in my profile. Then I get a brilliant idea. Maybe all I gotta do is some slight manipulation so I look juicier in my picture. So I open up Photoshop and make myself look straight diesel. Now I'm getting tons of matches because the ladies can't control their thumbs when they see me. They just swipe right. This is similar to what a compressor can help you do. It can help you reshape your sounds to really accentuate certain parts and really make them be a lot more prominent, a lot more bulging. Whereas just turning up the volume, that doesn't really reshape your sound. You're basically still stuck with the exact same sound, but just more of everything. So in this example, I'm not reshaping certain parts of my body to look bigger. I'm just taking every single part of my body and making everything look bigger. At that point, Tinder's probably gonna go out of business since every single woman that sees me is gonna become celibate. And so this is what happens when you don't use a compressor. You end up home alone on a Friday night, shaking hands with the milkman just like me. So that's tip number 2 to get your drums to sound better in your beats. The final one has to do with improper layering. This is yet another issue that I see producers commonly face. So let's say I'm in the process of adding my drums into my beat, and I have a kick right here that sounds decent. But I want this kick to sound louder. Many people will commonly say, hey, stupid, you should layer your sounds to get them louder. But this isn't always going to be helpful. For example, with this kick right here, take a look at its frequency readout. Now let's say I go ahead and start to layer this kick, and I find this second kick right here. And I layer this kick onto the one that I already have. Now take a look at the frequency readout of this new layered kick compared to my original one. As you can see, my kick actually got weaker. You may have thought that adding more layers onto a sound would only make it sound louder, but here you can see we get the opposite effect. And the reason why this happens is because these two sounds are out of phase. This is something that you may have heard of before, but if not, I'll quickly explain it. When you have two sounds play at the exact same time, the shape of their waveforms matter. For example, if I took two sounds that were the complete opposite of each other, what happens is that they get combined. And when I combine two opposite sounds, they cancel each other out, sort of like adding -1 and +1 together. So if I take this kick right here, and I take the second kick, which is the complete opposite of the first kick if you look at the waveform, meaning where there is a peak in kick number 1, there is a trough in kick number 2, and vice versa. When I play both sounds at the exact same time, we get absolutely no sound. They cancel each other out. Now this is an extreme example. Obviously we still heard the kick in my example when I played my two kicks, but that's because this phasing issue can still occur just to a smaller degree. There may be a short moment where the first kick and the second kick's waveform briefly go in the opposite directions, and that can be enough to make your overall kick sound weaker. So when you layer two sounds together and it feels like it somehow got weaker, this is why it's happening. So in this situation, there are a few things that you can do. Number 1 is to reverse the polarity of one of the sounds. This will take one of your samples and flip it upside down. That might help. So in FL Studio, that's this button right here. Another way is to just slightly shift one of your sounds left or right. So hopefully its waveform is not going the opposite direction of your other sound. Or what I do in this situation is just find another sound to layer, one that isn't out of phase with my first sound. And overall, this is the 3 common problems I see with a lot of people's drums and why they end up sounding so weak. So hopefully you learned something from this video. If you did, like and subscribe. Head over to betterbeatmaker.com if you want to check out my full online beat making course. The link to my free drum kit is available in the description box below, as well as a link to my Discord if you want to join my producer community. And I will see you guys next time.